The old house on Maple Street stood like a weary sentinel, its clapboard siding weathered by decades of New England winters. Ivy clung to the walls, curling around the chipped paint like fingers grasping at memories. Clara Hammond, now 45, stood on the cracked sidewalk, her breath visible in the crisp October air. She hadn't been back to her childhood home in 20 years, not since the summer after her mother's funeral, when she'd packed her bags and left for college, vowing never to return. Clara adjusted the scarf around her neck, her fingers brushing against the silver locket she wore, a gift from her mother, Ellen, who had died when Clara was 25. The locket held a tiny photo of the two of them, smiling on a beach, their hair whipped by the wind. Clara's life had moved forward since then, a career as a social worker in Boston, a small apartment filled with books and plants, and a quiet, solitary existence. But the house on Maple Street held something unfinished, something that had tugged at her heart when she'd received the lawyer's letter about its impending sale. "Miss Hammond?" The realtor, a young woman with a clipboard and a bright smile, approached. "Ready to take a look inside?" Clara nodded, though her stomach churned. The key turned in the lock, and the door creaked open, releasing a musty scent of dust and time. The living room was just as she remembered, the faded floral sofa, the oak coffee table, the fireplace with its chipped mantel. Her eyes lingered on the staircase, where she used to slide down the banister as a child, laughing as her mother scolded her gently. "I'll give you some time to look around," the realtor said, sensing Clara's need for solitude. "Take as long as you need." Clara wandered through the house, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. In the kitchen, she traced her fingers over the counter where her mother had taught her to bake oatmeal cookies. Upstairs, her old bedroom was empty, save for a few forgotten posters curling at the edges. She opened the closet, half expecting to find her childhood toys, but it was bare. It was in her mother's bedroom that Clara paused. The room felt sacred, untouched. The bed was stripped, the curtains gone, but the old mahogany dresser still stood against the wall. Clara's heart ached as she remembered her mother sitting at that dresser, brushing her hair, humming softly. On impulse, Clara opened the top drawer. It was empty, as expected, but something compelled her to check the others. In the bottom drawer, beneath a layer of dust, she found a small, yellowed envelope. Her name was written on it in her mother's elegant script, Clara. Clara's hands trembled as she held the envelope. The paper was brittle, the ink slightly faded, but her mother's handwriting was unmistakable. She sank onto the floor, her back against the dresser, and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly, and a faint scent of lavender, her mother's favorite, wafted out. The letter began. "My dearest Clara. If you're reading this, it means you've come back to the house, and for that, I'm grateful. I've written this letter 100 times in my head, but putting it on paper feels like confessing a part of my soul. There's so much I want to tell you, so much I should have said when I had the chance. I hope it's not too late." Clara's eyes stung as she read. Her mother had written this letter in the final months of her life, when cancer had already taken her strength but not her spirit. Ellen had been a quiet woman, reserved but fiercely loving, and Clara had always felt her love, even in the silences. But this letter hinted at something deeper, something unspoken. Ellen wrote about her childhood, growing up in a small town in Maine, where her own mother had been strict and distant. She wrote about meeting Clara's father, a charming but restless man who left when Clara was 3. Clara knew that part of the story, her mother had raised her alone, working long hours as a nurse to provide for them. But then the letter took a turn Clara hadn't expected. "I made a mistake, Clara, one that I've carried for years. When you were 16, you brought home a boy named Daniel. Do you remember him? He was quiet, with kind eyes, and he looked at you like you were the sun. I saw the way you lit up around him, and it scared me. I was afraid you'd lose yourself in love, the way I did with your father. So I pushed him away. I told him he wasn't good enough for you, that he should leave you alone. And he did." Clara's breath caught. Daniel. She hadn't thought of him in years, but the name brought a flood of memories, his shy smile, the way he'd read poetry to her under the oak tree in the backyard, the mixtapes he made her. They'd been inseparable that summer, until one day he stopped calling. Clara had been heartbroken, convinced she'd done something wrong. She'd never known her mother had intervened. The letter continued. "I thought I was protecting you, but I see now that I stole something precious from you. Daniel came to me years later, when you were in college. He was different then, older, steadier. He asked about you, and I could see he still loved you. I told him you'd moved on, that you were happy. I don't know if that was true, but I couldn't bear the thought of you being hurt again. I gave him a letter to give to you, but he said he'd respect my wishes and stay away. I don't know if he ever delivered it. If he didn't, I hope you can forgive me. And if you ever see him again, tell him I was wrong." Clara wiped tears from her cheeks. The letter ended with words that pierced her heart. "You are my greatest joy, Clara. I hope you find love, not just in others, but in yourself. Live boldly, my girl. Don't let my mistakes hold you back." Clara sat on the floor for a long time, the letter clutched to her chest. The house was silent, but her mind was loud with questions. Who was Daniel now? Had he ever tried to find her? And what was in the letter he was supposed to give her? She felt a strange mix of anger and gratitude toward her mother, anger for the interference, gratitude for the truth. Back in Boston, Clara couldn't let the letter go. It sat on her nightstand, a constant reminder of what might have been. She began searching for Daniel online, but Daniel Carter was a common name, and the few leads she found, a LinkedIn profile, an old high school reunion photo, led nowhere. She called her old friend Sarah, who'd known them both back then, but Sarah hadn't heard from Daniel in years. He was always kind of a mystery, Sarah said over coffee. After that summer, he just disappeared. I heard he moved out west, maybe California. Clara's search became an obsession. She scoured social media, old yearbooks, even contacted their high school's alumni office. Finally, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source, the local library in her hometown. Clara had donated her mother's books years ago, and the librarian, an older woman named Mrs. Grayson, remembered Daniel. He used to come in here all the time, Mrs. Grayson said over the phone. Always checking out poetry books. He left town after high school, but I heard he became a teacher. Try looking in Portland, Oregon. I think that's where he ended up. Clara booked a flight to Portland the next week. She didn't know what she was looking for, closure, answers, or something more, but she felt her mother's words urging her forward, live boldly, my girl. In Portland, Clara visited local schools, asking about a teacher named Daniel Carter. At the third school, a middle school with a mural of whales painted on the wall, the secretary nodded. Mr. Carter? He's in room 12, but he's teaching right now. You can wait in the office. Clara's heart raced as she sat in the school office, clutching her purse. When the bell rang and students spilled into the halls, she saw him. Daniel was older now, his hair streaked with gray, but his eyes were the same kind, searching. He froze when he saw she, his expression a mix of shock and recognition. Clara, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. They sat in a small coffee shop across from the school, the air thick with unspoken words. Daniel's hands wrapped around a mug, his fingers tapping nervously. Clara noticed a wedding band on his left hand, and her heart sank, though she wasn't sure why. "I can't believe you're here," Daniel said. "After all these years." Clara told him about the letter, her mother's confession, and her search. Daniel listened quietly, his eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he exhaled slowly. "I'm so sorry, Clara," he said. "I should have fought harder to stay in your life. But your mom, she was so certain it was the right thing. And I was just a kid, you know? I didn't know how to argue with that." He told her about the letter he was supposed to deliver. "I carried it for years," he said. "I wanted to give it to you, but when I went to your college, your mom said you were happy, that you didn't need me stirring things up. So I kept it. I still have it, actually." Clara's eyes widened. "You still have it?" Daniel nodded. "It's at my house. I can get it for you, if you want." They drove to his house, a modest bungalow with a garden full of wildflowers. Inside, Daniel introduced Clara to his wife, Emily, a warm woman with a quick laugh. Clara felt a pang of jealousy, but Emily's kindness disarmed her. Daniel retrieved a small wooden box from a shelf and handed Clara an envelope. It was addressed to her in his teenage handwriting. "I never opened it," Daniel said. "It was always yours." Clara opened the letter, her hands shaking. It was written on lined paper, the ink smudged in places where Daniel's tears had fallen. "Clara, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I'm leaving town tomorrow, and I don't know if I'll ever see you again. But I need you to know that loving you was the best thing I ever did. You made me believe in myself, in the world, in something bigger than both of us. I'm sorry I wasn't enough. I hope you find everything you're looking for. Yours, always, Daniel." Clara cried as she read, and Daniel's eyes were wet too. Emily excused herself quietly, giving them space. They talked for hours, filling in the gaps of 20 years. Daniel had become a teacher, inspired by Clara's love of literature. Clara shared her work as a social worker, helping families in crisis. They laughed over old memories and mourned the time they'd lost. "I'm glad you're happy," Clara said finally, glancing at the wedding band. Daniel smiled softly. "I am. But you were my first love, Clara. That doesn't go away." Clara returned to Boston with both letters, her mother's and Daniel's, tucked into her bag. She felt lighter, as if a weight she hadn't known she carried had been lifted. She visited her mother's grave, a small headstone in a cemetery overlooking the sea, and placed a sprig of lavender on it. "I forgive you, Mom," she whispered. "And I'm going to live boldly, like you wanted." Clara began to change her life. She reached out to old friends, took up painting, and started writing a memoir about her mother. She stayed in touch with Daniel, exchanging emails about books and life. Their connection was no longer romantic, but it was deep and real, a bridge between past and present. One day, Clara volunteered at a community center, teaching a writing workshop for teenagers. She saw herself in their hopeful, uncertain faces, and she thought of Daniel's letter, "You made me believe in myself." She decided to dedicate her life to helping others find their voices, just as her mother and Daniel had helped her find hers. Years later, Clara published her memoir, The Letter She Found. It became a quiet success, touching readers with its honesty and humanity. At a book signing, a young woman approached her, holding a copy. "This book changed my life," the woman said. "It made me reach out to my mom after years of not talking." "Thank you." Clara smiled, her heart full. She thought of her mother's words, "You are my greatest joy." And she knew, in that moment, that she had honored her mother's legacy not by avoiding mistakes, but by learning from them, by loving fiercely, and by living boldly.